When Crisis ended in 1986, it had lived up to its promise. Worlds lived, worlds died, and the DCU was never the same. And soon, neither was Superman. Across the Man of Steel miniseries and a subsequent 2-year run on the main titles, writer-artist John Byrne revamped Superman for the post-Crisis era. Earth was Superman's primary influence. Kal-El was the sole survivor of a cold, sterile Krypton. Clark was never Superboy, but did dominate the football field. The Kents lived, and Lois Lane and Lex Luthor were reborn to meet the moment of the late 1980s. These changes have been debated for years. Now, in a new Digging for Kryptonite epic, we're revisiting the Byrne era one more time on the verge of its 40th anniversary and evaluating its ultimate impact on the Superman mythology and our fandom. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the second and final year of the John Byrne era on the main super titles is first-time guest Tim Bruns. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. Really appreciate it. Really looking forward to talking about all of this Byrne material.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've done a couple of Patreon recordings together over the years, but it's your first time on the main Digging for Kryptonite feed, and the audience has heard your name a lot because you'll often submit really great comments and questions. And most recently, I thanked you on air, and now I'm going to say it directly to you, but thank you again for that Amazing Heroes issue, which was, like I said, just an absolute treasure trove and was really helpful as I was preparing for this. So thank you.
Oh, I'm really glad you enjoyed it and that it was helpful. And if you get beyond any of the Byrne stuff in there, there's a great little article at the back called The 10 Best Secret Identity Stories. That's just a fun read.
Yes, I did get to that as well, and it was terrific. But yeah, I don't want to embarrass you, but you've sent me a ton of stuff over the years, and I'm always very grateful.
Thank you for continuing to give all of us the great content.
Well, I appreciate that. So in terms of what we're covering this time, so we're talking about comics released across the year 1988. And that includes Superman 12 through 22, written and drawn by John Byrne, Adventures of Superman 436 through 444, co-plotted by Byrne and Jerry Ordway, scripted by Byrne, drawn by Ordway, and Action Comics 594 through the milestone 600th issue. That's a relatively small group of issues because at that point, Action Comics switched to weekly and sort of tapped out of this era that we're talking about here. So essentially, we are reading what has been collected in volumes 3 and 4 of that 4-volume Man of Steel hardcover set. We did not specifically hit the Earth Stealers original graphic novel that Byrne wrote that was drawn by Kurt Swan. That's included in those hardcovers. We're not going to hit that specifically, but we do acknowledge it's in there. Let me ask you this. How did you read? Were you using the hardcovers or did you have the issues or using the app?
Have all of the issues in boxes in the basement, but I ended up biting the bullet on the ultra version of the app once I was invited to do this episode, and I went digital.
Wow. You hear that, DC? That's another subscriber there. Just saying. But no, that's great. I once again followed the hardcovers, and I'll reiterate what I said last time. I think the mapping in the hardcovers is very strong. It's generally following the publication order, but will deviate where appropriate to keep multi-part stories together. And so it was ultimately a pretty seamless reading experience. Now, just like last week, we're not going to go issue by issue. These episodes are long enough. I've sort of organized my thoughts and notes into a few major categories that we'll jump around to. So Superman's team-ups with other heroes of the DC universe, the debut or return of certain key villains, the Millenium crossover issues, the interpersonal dynamics, which continue to get fleshed out during this second year, which I was very happy to see. And of course, the Supergirl Saga, which was Byrne's unintended 3-part finale to his entire run. Before I give my big picture take and before we get into those specific areas, let me toss the ball to you. Now, I know a good bit of this from our past conversations, but to refresh my memory and get the audience up to speed, how does the Byrne era of Superman intersect with your Superman fan journey?
Sure. From the time I was about 3 years old, big Superman guy. My dad had introduced me to the first Christopher Reeve movie on HBO, when one must have been the very late 70s at that point. And I would get Superman and Action Comics off of the spinner rack at the local grocery stores, wherever I could find them, and I enjoyed them. But wouldn't say that I picked up every one every month until the summer of 1986 rolled around, and they started doing house ads for a new miniseries called Man of Steel. And I was 9 or 10 years old at the time. There was no internet back then. You're just, working with what you have. So I was excited because we had a new miniseries coming out starring my favorite character. And the John Byrne artwork in that house ad of Superman swooping out toward you looked really cool and dynamic compared to a lot of what had come before. And that summer, my family would spend a lot of time driving between our home in Rochester, New York, and down to visit one of the nearby lakes. And along the way, there was a little comic book store in a town called Victor, New York. It's Top Shelf Comics. It is long gone to history now. But between a lot of other small mom and pop shops was this place. And I don't know that my folks were thrilled about making stops every week at that store when we traveled back and forth, but I really campaigned for it because I knew this new Superman story was coming out. So I have a vivid memory of a June summer morning, very sunny, running up the big stone flight of steps with my younger brother. And I got the cover with Krypton exploding, and he got the one with the shirt rip, which I think is the first variant cover ever to be done by anyone everywhere. And from that moment forward, I was buying everything every month. I, put my paper route money right toward that job. I'd clean the house, I'd mow the lawn, whatever I needed to do to keep up with what was happening across those titles. So,
oh man, that's a beautiful story. I love hearing that. And obviously I've told my own version of that story many times. Mm-hmm. And I think for anyone listening, right, we all have that moment that really just grabbed us and pulled us into this world. And yeah, not to sound like an old man, but it's like, as you're talking about not having that knowledge in advance about what was coming, right, other than those house ads, yeah, I can't help but think that adds a bit to the magic of it. And when I think back to the characters and the particular comic book titles where I had similar moments where I just saw something on the shelf and I hadn't read interviews and previews and spoilers, and it was just something that caught my eye and pulled me in. Mm-hmm. And there's something very special and magical about this. Not that you can't have a similar type of thing if you go in with all of that knowledge, but yeah, there's something about that.
Yeah. And without wanting to disparage any of the creators that came before in the monthly Superman and Action titles of the day, I had been reading those and they were fun, but they were clearly meant for a younger kid audience. You go back and look at them now and they don't have the same punch. And one of the other things I had hoped to find in those boxes of basement comic books was a weekly reader from grade school that a friend of mine who knew that I was a big Superman had saved. We didn't get it in my class, but he got it in his. And on the cover of that edition of the weekly reader, you had the new Superman, and there was the classic 1930s breaking of the chains that was right at the front of this summer's Superman movie, next to your kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger built John Byrne Superman. And obviously a lot had come in between for those of us who followed, but everybody seemed to notice that there was this big shift happening with this cultural icon. So it was a fun time to be a Superman fan.
Yeah, no, and it's great to hear that in the first episode of this event, we had those segments with Rich and Martin, and they too had been reading for a while, even longer than you had. And it was great to get their perspective. And similarly here, I do love hearing from folks who were there when it happened to talk about how it landed. So here's where I am in my Superman fan journey vis-a-vis the John Byrne era. So on a very positive note, I think virtually all of the things that I bumped up against in Byrne's first year on the titles, which we talked about last week, have largely been smoothed over in the second year. And just to reiterate, this is not the first time I'm reading this material. It's the second that I'm reading it in full. First time in a few years. And it is the first time that I'm reading it in that true publishing order, because previously I had looked at each title more or less on its own.
Okay.
And so the things that I bumped up against last time that I think are smoothed over here, number one, I do really feel like Byrne got more interested in mining more of the emotional side and the inner struggle of the character. I felt like in the first year, most of that fell to Marv Wolfman's Adventures of Superman title. And we got a fair amount of that. And it was great. That's why that was my favorite title of the first year. And it felt like Byrne's issues were just a little bit light for my taste. And I feel like here we get more of what I was longing for. He expresses frustration over never being able to prove Luthor's misdeeds. And he laments his personal situation with Cat Grant and Lois, and the dire situation that Jose Delgado finds himself in when he's paralyzed after that battle. So that really went a long way. The other thing too is, and I suspect this is probably a function of Byrne now being at the helm of all three titles, but they definitely all fit together more seamlessly. And we're not quite in triangle era mode of storytelling yet, but I would argue for a lot of this, we're pretty close to it. There's a much greater sense of consistency across the titles where one will feed into the next and so on. Right.
Agreed.
So that was a big thing. The other thing on the note of Adventures of Superman, because like I said, it's been a few years. I didn't really remember. My fear was that with Wolfman gone and Byrne taking over Adventures, that a lot of those threads that Wolfman had introduced would just kind of fall by the wayside, like Hamilton and Cat Grant and Jose Delgado. And I was pleasantly, again, I hate to say surprised. I've read these before, but still it was refreshing to see that wasn't the case. Byrne continued to utilize those characters. Now, I don't know if that was Byrne's own instinct or it was the request/insistence of Jerry Ordway and or Mike Carlin, but whatever the reason, the fact that, because this could have easily, Adventures of Superman could have very easily turned into Superman 2.0, where it just sort of felt like another issue of Byrne's main flagship Superman title. But I didn't feel that way. I really felt like it continued to have that Adventures of Superman feel. And obviously having Jerry Ordway as co-plotter and artist went a long way towards that. But still, I was very happy to see that.
There is no question, I don't think, that when you look at Superman, you look at action during those team-up issues, they are much flashier than Adventures of Superman, but often there is more heart in Adventures of Superman in terms of, I mean, you mentioned the Gangbuster issue in his battle with Combator, and we'll talk about that. But I would argue, for me, on reread, that was up there with the difficulty of watching the Doomsday take Superman out. That was up there with, from cinema, watching Tom Hardy's Bane break Christian Bale's Batman. Those are just tough scenes to watch, for me at least. And I thought that rose to that level.
Yeah, if we're giving out superlatives, that was Adventures of Superman 437 by Byrne and Ordway. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but it's fine. It deserves it. It utilizes this dual narrative structure where the top panels of the pages are showing you this conversation between Lex Luthor and Celia Winward, one of the new Guardians, who I knew next to nothing about, but a little Wikipedia search helped me out. And then the bottom panels of the issue recount this, like you said, very harrowing battle that Gangbuster engages in against Combator, who Lex is behind, who's trying to use Lois as bait to draw out Superman. And Gangbuster fights with everything he has and ends the issue paralyzed. And it's gripping, and the structure of the issue is really kind of interesting. It didn't fit into the traditional mold. I mean, that was such a standout. And yeah, that was Byrne and Ordway in Adventures of Superman. So, I mean, that book continued to be strong. But yeah, overall, just the fact that it continued to retain the feel that it had, I really appreciated.
And by the by, that's not to say that I don't absolutely love the Superman and action stuff. It's tremendous fun. But if we're looking for more word-heavy issues, more exposition, I think Adventures was a step ahead of the others in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I guess on that note, if we're evaluating them in terms of ease of homework preparation, the other issues really just kind of flew by. You knew when you hit the Adventures issues, You were going to get, it was going to be a little bit more of a meal. You were going to spend a little more time on it, which is not a bad thing at all.
No.
So the last big picture thing, and I feel like I've said some version of this in some way, shape, or form through all of our Byrne discussions, but here it is. And one of the things that finally crystallized this, we had a comment in our Facebook group by one of our audience members, Aaron, who talked about how he stopped reading when Byrne left. But more recently, he's actually been going back and reading the Triangle era. And he was so struck by, once again, the foundation that Byrne had laid. And so I don't want to speak for him. That was essentially the gist of his post, but it's just kind of interesting because I know what a big Byrne fan he is. And so it seems like from his perspective, he reads the Triangle era stuff and it just sort of further cements how impactful Byrne was and what a debt the Triangle era owed to Byrne. Whereas for me, my heart is always with the Triangle era. That's where the feeling, the memory, the emotion is really stored for me when it comes to Superman comics. But I also think, being as objective as I possibly can be, that they are qualitatively stronger stories. I certainly enjoy them more. Yet I still recognize the foundation that was laid. So I feel like a lot of this comes down to perspective, because I think, and now we've heard from a number of folks, including yourself, I think for people who were reading before Byrne or who started with Byrne, I could see why the Byrne era made such an impression and was so impactful, and why it felt new and fresh and different. And as always, I'm not generalizing. I know everyone has their own perspective, but like I said, I can just understand why, if you were reading before or you started with Byrne, it made the impression that it did, and why you might hold up those stories more. For me, I cannot deny the reality of my experience. I started after Byrne, and I have such an attachment to those following stories. So for me, at the end of the day, as much as I did enjoy my reading for this episode and the last episode, I did. But at the end of the day, these Byrne stories do still fall into that category for me of respecting what they did in their day, more so than enjoying them as stories that I really hold up. And I don't try to take away from others' enjoyment of these stories, but I think that's where I am, and I don't know that I'll ever really shift on that front. So I respect them, but in terms of that ultimate enjoyment, they're always going to fall short of the stories that came for me.
Can I float a question?
Yeah. Go for it.
So I'd like to add one adjective to the description, and that is cool. And I'm adding that because, and I know these are not the issues we're focusing on, but taking a step back to right before Byrne, maybe we had a great Brian Boland cover of Superman turning into a werewolf, but the interior might not have lived up to that in the same cool way. And when we, or at least for me and the very few other kids I knew who read comic books, got to Byrne's material, it was the best kind of big summer blockbuster, splashy popcorn at the movies presentation of Superman with that nod toward Christopher Reeve. He wasn't always wearing a blue suit with a red tie when he was Clark Kent and being meek and mild-mannered. He was cool, and people wanted to be around him, and everybody was excited when he showed up. And I think Byrne might have mentioned in one of the sound bites in Amazing Heroes that, I draw Superman flying upside down a lot. He's having fun being Superman. And that was very different from what we've been used to at the time. And I don't know if you're familiar with what was the DC preview flyer from the late 80s, early 90s called Direct Currents.
I mean, just generally.
Okay, so you'd get it at your local comic shop, and I have a vivid recollection of seeing cover of the month for shortly after the Byrne books were going to end. And it was, I want to say it was Superman 25, where Clark is in the Daily Planet newsroom, and his shirt has been ripped open to show the S shield underneath. and Lois is lying, either very badly injured or dead on the ground in front of him. And there's this word bubble that, Lois, I didn't mean to. Oh no. And it was there that I learned as a kid that Byrne wasn't going to be doing the books anymore. And my thought at the time, sitting there at the local restaurant in the mall near my comic shop, was, oh no, because I knew how exciting those stories had been for me. And now is it going to be a return to what I had been used to before? Are they still going to be cool? What's going to happen? And I think that over time, I think everybody had been taking their cues and their leadership from Byrne for so long within that group that eventually we got back to that level of cool for him. I don't know that things like I've heard you mention on your show before, like the Mr. Z issues, or time and time again, there were fun ideas. There were good ideas. I don't know if they were as splashy and cool as what Byrne was putting out at the time, but eventually we're getting to, Death and Return of Superman. We're getting to all of those big things that would follow and be really exciting. So I think he gave them a good runway from which they took off and eventually got to even greater heights than what he was able to accomplish.
Yeah, no, well said, no arguments. And yeah, not to belabor the point, but I think ultimately it just sort of comes down to, like I said, perspective and sort of what we're comparing Byrne to. And so I feel like, yes, if you are comparing Byrne to what preceded the post-crisis reboot, and others will disagree, but generally, I think if you're making that comparison, or yes, to some of those elements from the post-Byrne era, like Mr. Z, and no arguments here. I'm not gonna mount a passionate defense for Mr. Z. Not everything was golden that followed.
I don't mean to, I'm not trying to punch down at Mr. Z or any of the other stuff. It's just that in terms of grabbing the readership, I think that after those teams established that, hey, we really know what we're doing and we're going to take it in our own direction now, that once they gelled as a team, absent Byrne, who had been such a central part of what they had been working on, that then everything really came together.
Yeah, no, exactly. But so, yeah, I feel like if you're comparing Byrne to what came before, I get why it resonates so much more. For me, it's just I'm comparing it to the era that followed that I love so much. So, so that's where I land where I do. At the same time, though, I do want to say, and for the record, that I did enjoy the second year of the Byrne era on the main titles more than the first. And I wouldn't trade the subsequent comics and the Triangle era for anything. Yet, I did come away from the end of that Supergirl saga saying, man, it is a shame that we didn't get to see where Byrne was going with this. Now, would it have been as compelling as that Exile arc, which I think was terrific and I'm a big fan of? I don't know. Like, we don't know where Byrne was going with this, but I do more so now than before. I do have that feeling of, oh man, like I felt like things were coming together and gelling, and I would have wanted to see more of where he was going.
Yeah. No Exile, no Eradicator. It's kind of a big deal.
Absolutely.
Right.
So can we start? I know this is a random place to plunge us into, but can we start with one of the weirdest, most insane story choices in all of this? I'm thinking of an issue of Action Comics.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Following Millenium, where Lois visits Smallville. Famous cover of Superman standing between Lois and Lana, like they're fighting, but there's a very cheeky note from Byrne on the cover that says, "I promise this does not happen in the issue," and it's signed John Byrne. But Lois is investigating the aftermath of all this Millenium business, which we could talk more about, but she comes upon Superman, not Clark, Superman talking to Lana Lang, and starts asking all of these questions, and ultimately comes to the point where she says point blank to Superman, "Are you really Clark Kent?" And it's at this moment that Ma and Pa enter the picture and try to help, and Pa spins this tale about how Jonathan and Martha had found baby Kal-El's rocket ship, took him in, and raised him in secret as essentially Clark Kent's stepbrother. Of course, this only further enrages Lois, who for years already has carried this unending grudge over the fact that Clark, the slime ball, the swine, was able to swoop in and snag that first exclusive on Superman. And now, to add insult to injury, it turns out Clark had the inside track all along. He's had this personal hidden relationship with Superman for all of these years. This is one of those things. And I feel like it's not too long before this is really never referenced again, and probably for good cause. But what the F was that?
Yep. There is I have a note here that I jotted to myself. Superman flying above Smallville. Pa was only trying to help out. It was a good save. No, it was not. This was a strange story choice. So a couple of things I have jotted down about this issue. The first is that I'm going to name drop here one of our creators, if I can, Carl Kiesel, who I think is the unsung hero of inking Byrne artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Absent his touch, boy, and I've never met Carl Kiesel, but I have this little personal connection to him. And my personal connection is that while I was growing up working in a grocery store, the manager of the department my girlfriend worked in knew the Kiesel family. And every once in a while, she would get to bump into him, and he had, by her telling, a cool leather Superman jacket. And he was getting rid of a comic book collecting case he had built when he was a kid. And it had, 4 or 5 panels across and these folding down glass display cases that you could put one issue in, stack all the others behind it. So for a number of years there, as I moved from apartment to apartment, I had Carl Kiesel's comic book display case that I got to keep all of my stuff in. Eventually, unfortunately, it fell apart beyond repair. Sorry, Carl, if you're listening. I did what I could with it for a long time, but I have appreciated his artwork forever, and I got to hear stories about him inking during these days. And apparently he lived in a very hot New York City apartment, and he'd have to have fans going on him all the time because it would be so hot that he'd have to, keep from perspiring on the artwork while he was inking it. So my kudos to him for doing a tremendous job and really making a difference in how the artwork was presented. So I wanted to recognize him for what he did there before he went on to do a lot of other great creating. But yeah, I can't imagine what compelled Pa Kent to make that particular choice to try to save things. Maybe better to just stay out of it and let Clark handle it in that moment.
Yeah, it's like, what the hell, man? It's like, from Pa's perspective in story, it's very hard to justify. But then from the perspective of the creative side of things, it's just like, right. What are we really doing here other than adding another reason to keep Lois and Clark apart? And I feel like, well, all right, I'll play devil's advocate because I have been complaining about how it grew tiresome for me that Lois was continuing to hold this grudge about losing that first exclusive for so many years. Mm-hmm. Years have passed during Man of Steel itself, and she's still harboring this. So I can appreciate the instinct, and maybe this is ultimately what was behind it, of, for whatever reason, not wanting to veer into romance with them quite yet, but wanting some other reason to keep them apart. And so we're not just going to harp on the same thing about that first story, but now we're going to add another new component. So if that's the instinct, I can appreciate that, but this was not the way to do it. I mean, it's just so weird because it's like, why does he have a secret identity? I mean, of course we know, and especially in this Byrne iteration, like Clark says, Superman isn't real. He's a pair of long johns, mm-hmm. right? So Clark really is who he is. That identity is fundamentally important to him. But big picture, it allows him to keep the ones he loves safe. So this notion of creating this close connection between Superman and the Kents just completely blows it up. Now, thankfully, Lois doesn't run the story. There's even a line in a subsequent issue about she told Perry, but Perry put the kibosh on it. Mm-hmm. So whether Lois and or Perry, so thankfully they didn't run it, but that could have been exceedingly bad for this family.
Right. So, journalistic integrity problem to begin with. A strange line in there, again, jotted in my notes that, Clark and Superman raised as brothers, not friends. They've got more of a working relationship. None of this seems to add up. If we grew up together, we'd be more than just, name drop colleagues, I would think, if you're growing up in the same home.
Yeah, it's so baffling. And it's one of those things I feel like doesn't get talked about much. I feel like on both the creative and fan side, everyone just sort of agreed, we're just going to leave that one alone.
We want to forget that. Yeah. There was one little redeeming moment from this issue, for me at least. And I'm sure that the creative team of Superman and Lois was not diving deep on this issue, but the scene between Lois and Lana in the diner, when they're talking about what a difference that Clark was once he was off to Metropolis, and that probably Lois played a big part in that.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Lana flat out says, he loves you. Yeah, I agree. Yes. I like that a lot. And look, one of the other things that I have not been the biggest fan of is Byrne's depiction of Lois. And even now, as we get to the end of the Byrne era, I'm never going to hold up this iteration of Lois as my all-time favorite. But I did feel like in this second year, if nothing else, he spent more time with her. And I think particularly in developing that relationship between Lois and Jose Delgado, you got to see more of the other side of her, and you got to see a bit of that thawing. So that really went a long way. It's funny. I mean, Lois herself at one point refers to her as a cold witch. I think she's talking to Jose and she's like, I've got that cold witch number down. Sometimes it's hard to turn it off. So I like that he spent some more time and we got to kind of chip away at that a little bit. And that scene with Lois and Lana, I agree that if there's a highlight from that issue, it's that one.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Thank you for bringing up Karl Kesel. Because that was something that stood out to me as well. So most of the Byrne drawn issues that we read for this episode, he had an inker, including Karl Kesel. There were some issues, though, where Byrne inked himself. And I guess I haven't talked a ton about my general experience with John Byrne, but as a child of the 90s, it's like I came to Byrne far later in his career than I think a lot of other folks, right, who experienced his Marvel work and this earlier Superman work. For me, it's like I came to Byrne when he was doing the Wonder Woman run and then like Spider-Man Chapter 1. That's the era of Byrne where I first met this creator. And this was at the point where he was primarily inking himself and lettering the books as well. And I got to tell you, not a huge fan of that overall aesthetic.
I was excited when I heard Byrne was taking over Wonder Woman back when in the 90s, and excited in part because of how he had drawn her in these issues in Legends. And I thought, okay, and it's a very different look.
Yeah. And it's funny. I remember just a quick tangent, but I remember DC put out those comics that tied into the Heroes television show. And I remember Jim Lee did some of the covers. If I'm remembering correctly, I think they were Jim Lee pencils, but then Alex Ross painted over them or something. It was something like that. If nothing else, what I remember specifically is that it wasn't Scott Williams inking Jim Lee. This is not meant to knock Jim Lee. We love Jim Lee. Amazing artist. Would never deny that. But I remember those Heroes covers of his. And I remember as a high schooler or early college, whatever it was, having that realization of, oh, wow, the right inker can make all the difference in the world.
Absolutely.
Contrary to what 90s era Kevin Smith would allege, right? It's not tracing. There's so much that goes into it and really can make such a difference. And I saw that here in these Byrne issues. When we got to those few where he was inking himself, big difference. So inkers, Karl Kesel specifically, inkers generally, I think can be among the unsung heroes of the creative process. So absolutely.
For sure.
We could stay in Millennium territory, but I feel like that's going to be more of a gripe session. So let's jump to another pocket here. And then we can.
Here's my big gripe on Millennium. When I started to read those issues, I thought, I've never read that whole series. Let me go to it now that I'm on the app with the Ultra Level. No Millennium on the Ultra Level app.
No, there is no tier you can pay DC for where you'll get that Millennium crossover. So, but we'll circle back to more Millennium business. I want to jump to, it's only one issue, but it's an outlier. And it also points to, I think, kind of one of the core components of the Byrne era that I want to kind of bring home here as we're tying everything together. And it's one of Byrne's final issues of Superman. It's the Return to Krypton issue with guest penciler Mike Mignola, who, of course, did the World of Krypton miniseries that we've already talked about. And the premise of this one issue is that Superman is suffering the effects of kryptonite radiation poisoning. The idea is that the radiation from the blast that destroyed the planet is finally reaching Earth. And they tee this up in the previous week's issue, Action Comics 600, in a really great little Jimmy Olsen short story where Jimmy calls Superman for help and Superman saves the day, but then he collapses. He's feeling kryptonite, but there's no kryptonite around. And Jimmy breaks into this warehouse and steals his forklift and a box spring and a mattress, and he gets Superman on it and he brings it into a cave with the idea that the lead ore will protect him. It was great. I love that little bit with them. I thought that was a lot of fun.
I do. And, it reminded me a little bit of the Jimmy Olsen All-Star Superman issue. I'm in a jam, Jim, and he needs to help him out.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's his guy. And he was there. As much as he was called in to help Jimmy ended up returning the favor. I love that. And then in the subsequent story in Action 600, Superman encounters Man-Bat, and Superman's delirious at this point, but eventually recognizes Kirk and has him enlist the help of Hawkman. And then that leads us into this Return to Krypton issue where Hawkman and Hawkwoman, this is the Thanagarian incarnations of the character, they bring Superman.
Yeah, they liked each other. That was refreshing again.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who really met Hawkman through the Jeff Johns reinvention of the character, it's like, what is this? They get along? They're lovers? What?
Yep.
They're not forever torn apart. But so they take Superman to the remains of the planet Krypton, and you find out that all of those remains have essentially coalesced into this planetary mass with this ring around it. So it's not an alive planet, but it looks like Krypton is still intact. So you get a pretty cool visual. And Superman dons this lead-lined spacesuit and goes out there. And then he has this whole vision quest, essentially imagining. And he seems to see himself through Jor-El's eyes, as if he is Jor-El, and sort of has this whole vision quest about what if Jor-El and the other Kryptonians had been able to escape the planet and come to Earth. And in this vision, essentially, the Kryptonians all become these conquerors and enslave humanity, except for Jor-El, who ends up donning a Superman-like costume, or basically the Superman costume, becoming the savior and champion of the people. But ultimately, as he comes out of it, right, Superman's ultimate takeaway is it's good that he was the only survivor of this planet. He has this whole bit about this idea of the abuse of power, and if other Kryptonians had survived, this is likely what would have happened. What did you make of this issue in and of itself, but also kind of in the larger context of the Byrne era, where Earth really is the primary influence and Superman has hardly even a curiosity about where he actually comes from?
Yeah, so there was reading it at the time as a kid, and there was going back to visit it now. And I remember reading it at the time as a kid, the big surprise being the way they'd broken up the pages, turning the page and seeing the planet Krypton whole. I think it's just as if no cataclysm had befallen it. And wow, what is happening here? This is really different. And then, wait a minute, it's not a whole planet out there. They're just giant chunks of kryptonite. And in the here and now, it reminded me of the deleted scene from the opening of Superman Returns, where he goes back and he's, trying to see if there's anything left there for him to learn. But I really enjoyed the stepping away. The artwork, though a departure from the Byrne stuff that I was loving as a kid, served this story so much better, I think, than anything any of the other creators on the books at the time would have done to drive it forward. Those, giant space arcs landing in Smallville, skyscrapers that the Kryptonians were coming out of. And, really, no doubt in my mind that for the people of this version of the planet Krypton, yes, that's how it would have gone, and it probably is for the best that we only got Clark Kent out of the mix. So just a fun story. If listening to Digging for Kryptonite has taught me nothing else over the years, it's that we don't want to get too political on Digging for Kryptonite, although looking through some of those panels now of the humans being herded into detention camps and having everything taken from them, there are some unfortunate parallels.
Yeah.
So
I hope that's not been the primary takeaway of this podcast, is not to get political. We're appropriate. It's all right.
I don't want to get any hate mail for you or for me. I just, it struck a chord reading it again.
We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. As a Superman fan, have you ever wondered what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? Robbo is that kind of person, and that's exactly what he's done on a new show called This Podcast Will Never Die. The first season, called Superman Will Never Die, starts with all the unexpected ways the Man of Steel stood out from the pulp heroes on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. And now they're joined by the Shorts and Stout Film Festival in Long Beach, New York. Event details, as well as submission information for filmmakers, can be found at filmfreeway.com. It's funny because there was a moment early on in the issue where we have Superman's thoughts, and he expresses something to the effect of, "This is a mystery I've put off exploring for too long," i.e. Krypton. And in rereading this, but not remembering everywhere that it went, that really stood out to me. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, maybe this will sort of button up some of the Krypton portion of the story, and I'll feel a little bit better about Byrne's overall depiction of the role of Krypton, or lack thereof, in Clark's life. And yeah, we ultimately get to that point of his conclusion being that it's good that he was the only survivor. And I've been talking a lot in these episodes that I think a lot about the Byrne era in terms of the characterization and the stripping away of the mythology was an overcorrection, but a necessary one. And that it put the character and the mythology through this stress test that was ultimately a valuable process. That's where I've been. And I do still stand by that. But the lack of Krypton in Superman's life is still an area that I'll never really see eye to eye with Byrne on it. The fact that Krypton is overly cold and sterile in this depiction, that I'm okay with. But I think it's the fact that Kal-El is not even technically born on Krypton, that he's born in this gestation matrix on Earth, that I continue to have a problem with. And just beyond that, the fact that, it's funny, we haven't talked a lot about Krypton certainly in the last episode, and there's not going to be much more for us to say about it in this episode, because it hardly ever comes up.
Right.
And it's one of those things, I know I've said this before, but I'm more than fine with emphasizing the earthly side and his human upbringing. That should be, in my opinion, the primary driving force of why he does what he does. But I don't see why that has to come at the expense of this other side. And when we talked about it, when we did our Man of Steel episode, I put it more in terms of adoption. Like if you're an adopted child, I feel like it would only be natural to at least have some curiosity, if nothing else, about your birth parents. But, you mentioned getting political. And then the whole other component to this is, and this has been in the discussion recently in light of the James Gunn movie and some of the commentary around it, but it's like, from my view, yes, it is an immigrant story. And I feel like by making it that he was born on Earth and having him express little to no curiosity or interest or affection for his otherworldly origins, I just feel like that goes unexplored. And I don't think it really, I feel like it more just takes something away rather than add something. Like all the business about being born on Earth, I feel like, what does that add to the story?
Yeah. on the subject of Krypton itself, uh, I would, I will still argue that I think John Byrne's illustration of the exploding planet Krypton is and always will be my favorite ever. And especially in light of, like the clouds of smoke that were used to depict it before. I wonder if, and I'll throw it to you. So we go over to Byrne's version versus the Silver Age version and versus, let's say, the first issue of Birthright. And there you have a Krypton that is full of magic and wonder and super science and all of these things that, the Phantom Zone and the Crystal Mountains and the Firefalls of Krypton and the Lost City of Kandor and all of those bits of storytelling magic that had accumulated over the years, but in an effort to revamp Krypton we see in Byrne's Man of Steel is dust planet, scattered towers, a couple of people. And I don't know until you get to something like World of Krypton or like Exile, where you're meeting the Eradicator and learning about the deeper history of the planet, what Byrne had given himself to mine in that area in terms of why would this, if you've been presented all of that information through a hollow information dump in terms of the dust planet, what else is there to talk about until we learn more?
Fair. No. So that's a great point. And this has come up, but it's worth going back to. No, I agree. I mean, and Byrne has said as much. I very much think the intention behind the way Byrne depicted Krypton was to present a version of a planet that Superman would not have that connection to or curiosity about.
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that up. And I mean, maybe we're really picking this apart too much, but I do think it's important. So yeah, it's not even so much. Yeah, I guess my frustration doesn't lie with the character of Superman for not longing to learn more about his world, because I agree with you. I think in terms of what's presented here, maybe there's not much of a reason for him to do that. My greater frustration is with the creator for purposely presenting a version of the planet that would not lend itself to that kind of exploration. And I just feel like, there's a lot of, it comes up in numerous instances where, Earth is my true home. I'm an Earthman from America, in multiple issues. Right. But at the same time, part of me feels like this ends up becoming more of a telling and not showing sort of thing. It's like, all right, fine. Like you could keep saying he's an Earthman, but I like I said, I just don't know. There are other instances, other changes that were made where, okay, maybe this opens up a new angle of storytelling, or it clarifies or clears the deck or whatever it might be in the other changes that were made. But this, to me, I just feel like it took something away without really, because and look, different ways to look at this character. I get that. But from my perspective, and I really can't let this go, he is a child of two worlds. I mean, I feel like there is something kind of inherently interesting and compelling about that. And to really push one almost entirely to the side, I just feel like it undermines something.
Yeah. I think that I know we have talked a little bit in the past about Tom DeHaven's novel, It's Superman. He wrote another smaller book called Our Hero on Earth. And it's his personal experience with Superman. And it's interesting and fun. But one of the takeaways for me from that is that the things that are really going to work with Superman always manage to find their way back. The things that are going to work for that character stick. He doesn't leap an eighth of a mile, he flies. Okay. And I think in many ways, this was the reverse of that situation, where it wasn't the giving of something that we found out, oh, this is one of those things that sticks. It was the taking away of all of that backstory that, okay, some of this is really central to what has made this character work for so many years. And those plot elements are going to trickle back in over time. very shortly in this story, we're going to get a Supergirl. Maybe it's not the Supergirl we knew before, but this is the beginning of a few things making their way back in and eventually over time transitioning into those things that do work for the character long term.
Yeah, no, fair. And look, if the sense was, hey, in the pre-crisis continuity, he was traveling back in time to Krypton all the time. He was always shouting great row. He had met his parents and maybe they had leaned too much into that side and they wanted to recalibrate. I totally get that. I guess even within the context of my being okay with that overcorrection, I still, this is still an area that it just rubs me the wrong way. I mean, it's about getting political. It's like, yeah, I don't know if John Byrne would see his Superman as an immigrant story. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
I hope that he would, because I don't think there's any denying it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. But in terms of the way it's presented, yeah, I don't know. I'd be hard pressed to really make an argument for like, no, that's how he sees it as an immigrant story. But right. I can't speak for him, so I don't. We only have the material that's here. But this was a very interesting issue, and like we said, on the art side, I think really makes it stand out, and is a very nice compliment to that World of Krypton miniseries, which, like we talked about a couple episodes ago, was my favorite of that trilogy of miniseries. So it was cool to see.
Oh, absolutely! It was, of the three of them, certainly the winner.
All right. So like I said, a few other big categories here before we get to the big finale, the Supergirl saga. So on the note of the team ups with the rest of the DC universe. So we have encounters here with Batman. There's a bit of a team up in one of the annuals with Superman and Batman against one of these vampires, super vampires. Although not to beat up on this annual, but for a quote unquote team up issue, they have exceedingly little interaction, which felt like a little bit of a missed opportunity.
That issue scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
Yep. When the vampire Skeeter reveals her true form, I gave that one away to a friend of mine. I didn't give comic books away. I still don't for the most part. And that one I just had to have out of the house.
I'll, we're going to be talking about the Supergirl saga or not too long from now. And next year on the podcast, we're going to talk a lot about Supergirl, and included within that, of course, will be the Peter David series. And I remember as an elementary school kid reading those early issues of the Peter David series with all the cult business.
Yes.
I wasn't
creepy.
It wasn't frightening, but it was weird. And I remember being like, what is this?
Yeah.
So no, I hear you on that. And then there's more Batman interaction, the business with the scrapbook.
Yes.
Right. Yep. Martha Kent had been keeping the scrapbook, which we saw in Man of Steel. And then in Superman #2, when Lex was investigating Superman, his goons took that from the Kent farm. And then in one of the previous issues, Superman received the scrapbook in the mail at the Daily Planet. And then he brings it to Batman to investigate. And then they have a follow-up in one of these issues that we looked at. Where Batman has deduced that Clark Kent is Superman, which was great. And it's this great moment where, as they're parting, Superman addresses Batman as Mr. Wayne.
Yes.
So it's great.
I'm right back. Yep. Shades of the animated series. You peaked.
Yeah, exactly. And then, the scrapbook thread continues because Superman brings it to Jonathan and Martha for safekeeping, not realizing that it was her scrapbook all along.
Right. Yep. Mom, why would you do this?
You know, I wasn't thinking this as I read it, but now as we're kind of putting it all together, for as much as we talk about, the Kents are there and they're sounding board and maybe they need a little more communication. I feel like these three need to get on the same page here, because you got Pa is just wild card throwing out that nonsense about them being stepbrothers. We get Martha with the scrapbook. It's like, you guys just got to have a family meeting, all get on the same page with this, get your story straight.
Yeah. Let's not leave any clues behind.
Well, speaking of the Kents, man, another wild scene that I would never have expected was the Spectre in the Kent kitchen.
I really like the part where he's outside and the trick-or-treaters come upon him and he just has a little smile as the children flee in terror from the wrath of God.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, it seems like all of the adult children, so to speak, of Smallville, who had been implanted with these Manhunter chips and were these unwitting Manhunter sleeper agents, it seems like they've all died. And it's a very harrowing moment. And then Spectre enters the picture and saves their souls. They weren't actually in the afterlife. It was sort of an approximation of it, I guess, some sort of Manhunter program. But they're able to save the day. But then, yeah, the little epilogue, we have the Spectre in the Kent kitchen, and like the Kents are talking to him, but it was great because it's like in this post-crisis DCU where the JSA had existed at an earlier point in the timeline. Like they were the heroes of the Kent's generation, right? So they have an awareness of him. Yeah, but it was just kind of wild because I guess I always think more of, as a Spectre, more of this spiritual presence as opposed to like a guy in a green cloak.
Physical leotard. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, can I just throw one-eyed? Yeah. It just occurred to me as we were reading those issues with the Millenium tie-in and Smallville having been taken our time about justice for Pete Ross. He is not treated particularly well in the issue Junk here when he's trying to get the drop on Clark Kent. But wow, these, seemingly advanced aliens and manhunters, and what if a kid moves out of Smallville? How did they keep track of everybody? How did they not lose them to life over time? But hey, this is how things go in the DCU of the time.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the business about Superman and Clark being stepbrothers, weird, and I could do without it, but it's one small piece that, again, later gets ignored. But the Millenium stuff, I mean, we have a good handful of issues from the chunk that we looked at that tied into this Millenium crossover, which, like yourself, I've not read, don't have access to it. I mean, obviously we could find scans of it online, but and we actually talked about it in general terms when we did the World of Smallville miniseries, because that really kind of fills in all of the gaps with this. But for anyone who didn't hear that one or needs a refresher, yeah, the gist of it is that the Manhunters have had this, they've been keeping watch on Superman since before his rocket left Krypton, and in fact tried to intercept his rocket, but were met with the Green Lantern Corps, and that bought the rocket ship enough time to get to Earth and be found by the Kents. And that big snowstorm that provided the Kents with the cover that they needed to withdraw from society for a number of months and then return and pass the baby off as their own natural born son. Turns out that was an artificial creation of the Manhunters.
Did not care for that detail.
Did not care for that. It's like, there's a certain element. It's the same. I feel so bad for always going back to this, but it's the same reason why, like, I never cared for any of that Rogol Zar business. It's like, there's gotta be some element of destiny, of chance, I just feel like it makes it more mythic when we insert hands into this, shaping events. It's just like it becomes a hat on a hat, and I just don't think it's really necessary. And so that bummed me out that that all this business about the snowstorm, no, it was actually a creation of the Manhunters. But they replaced the town doctor, Dr. Whitney, with a shape-shifting Manhunter. I don't know. I did
think as I read it that you would appreciate that a guy named Whitney was hanging out with Lana Lang.
Yeah, we talked about this because not only there's that, but in the World of Smallville miniseries, it turns out Martha Kent's first husband was Dan Fordman and Whitney. So I feel like Whitney Fordman came from this era. Talk about the legacy of the John Byrne era. But anyway, so for years now, Dr. Whitney had implanted this chip in all of the newborn babies of Smallville, who he delivered and examined and implanted these chips, and they all became these unwitting spies who would be called upon to report to the Manhunters on the activities of Clark Kent, namely Lana, the one who was closest to him. And that's what a lot of that World of Smallville business that we talked about really shows Lana's larger journey, and because she was really used by them the most and spent years, tracking Clark, unknowingly reporting, losing time. It really kind of screwed up her life, which I think was an unfortunate thing to pin upon that character. I don't really care for any of this Manhunters and Smallville business, like at all. I don't have much more to say than that. I mean, I don't know. I just don't care for it. I don't know. Is there anything about it that stands out to you?
There's nothing that's super exciting there. Or to me, at least, maybe somebody out there has a great and deep love for Millenium, but if they do, I haven't met them yet. Millenium for me was, even back when, a disappointment in that I was loving the John Byrne Superman. I had come up off of the John Byrne Legends series. I thought, hey, maybe these miniseries are going to be more like that going forward. This one wasn't. I didn't take it any further than that.
Yeah, but I feel like this too, like with the stepbrother idea, the notion of Smallville having been infiltrated by the Manhunters and Lana and all these others being these unwitting agents. I feel like that's another thing that kind of got ignored as time went on, kind of like justifiably so.
Yeah, no, if I can be so bold, it makes the Superman story less fun.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I mean, to be fair, if we're really fleshing out the wider DC universe, the idea that the Manhunters were keeping watch on Krypton as it was nearing destruction, and they were clocking this rocket ship, and it's the sort of thing. I mean, there's some sort of appeal to that idea, or not even appeal, but it's just like if you're trying to kind of create a quote unquote realistic, wider DC universe. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It makes sense that you might have that and that the Green Lantern Corps might intervene. But ultimately, I think here's the thing. So much of this Byrne era was about stripping away, right? Back to basics, boiling it down. So what are we doing here? I mean, I feel like now we're inserting elements unnecessarily. And I also, but to be fair, it's like, I don't know how much, if any of this came from Byrne's own storytelling instincts versus, hey, we're doing this crossover. This is what we're doing. I don't know.
I think to your point about the story being more mythic when Krypton dies of natural causes or the blizzard hits Smallville just because the universe did the Kents a solid. Now, for me, that little spaceship is out there alone in the void. That lifeboat is there. Nobody has eyes on it. And it's only through the greatest luck that it gets where it's supposed to go. And Clark is found by the people who found him.
Yeah. It's fine. I don't know that we hit this point so hard or if at all when we did our Man of Steel discussion, but it's always, well, we did mention this, but I wanted to unpack it more. It's always wild to me in this Byrne era that Clark didn't know he was not their natural born son until that moment in the field. Cause I feel like in all of the subsequent media adaptations, right, he at least knows he's adopted. The shock is, oh, I didn't just come from another family on Earth. I came from another planet, right? Of course, we see that moment in Superman the Animated Series and Smallville and beyond. And that, for me, I think is kind of the more elegant way of presenting it. I really, and I don't know if this is something we're in the late 80s. I mean, I don't know if this points more towards views of being adoption generally at that time. I don't know. I don't know, but it's just kind of, I'm always struck by that it's like, oh man, he thought he was their natural born son.
Yeah. And just, what did he say? Some kind of mutant after he'd had the, Jor-El hologram interaction, but I don't know either. I know Byrne himself had remarked on that at one point. I'm guilty of not remembering if Byrne himself is adopted. But
I don't know.
I remember there was some hubbub about him remarking that he thought of adopted children who search out their birth parents later in life as being ungrateful. His word, not mine. He was actually a little more colorful than that in his description of it, and whether that colored how he told his version of the story, I don't know.
Oh, well, I'm glad you shared that because, man, does that snap a lot of things into place here. And I feel like, maybe in terms of why they hid that aspect from Clark, but even just going back to what we were saying before about Superman's general lack of interest in his Kryptonian side in the Byrne era. Yeah. I mean, if that was Byrne's view that, if you sought after where you came from, that pointed towards any lack of gratitude or appreciation for where you are. I mean, I strongly disagree with that. I don't think it's an all or nothing sort of thing. You can have utmost gratitude for where you ended up and the people who raised you, while also having a very natural curiosity and interest to sort of bring all of your pieces together. Or if you have no interest, I mean, that's valid as well. But I don't think it's kind of as blanket as kind of the way that comes across. That's amazing. Okay.
I'll see if I can dig up the interview.
Yeah, but no, that kind of answers that, I suppose. And then again, as far as these other team ups, I guess we've hit on enough of the Millennium stuff. Booster Gold, there's a 2-parter. There's an issue of Action Comics, and then an issue of the Dan Jurgens Booster Gold series where it seems like they're fighting, but then it ends up being a Booster Gold android powered by kryptonite created by Lex. I don't know. What did you make of that one?
So I had to trade a bunch of comics to a buddy of mine when I was a kid to get the Booster Gold follow-up issue. I had missed that on the rack. So when I found out he had it, we did a little bartering to get it. I like the bit at the beginning where he's meeting up with Batman regarding the scrapbook, and Robin is just starstruck that Superman is there, and he gets the special autograph. Superman uses his thumbnail to carve his inscription on a piece of sheet metal he finds on the roof. So I thought that was a cool tidbit. I enjoyed them duking it out, if only because it was not clear why Booster would ever be able to get the upper hand in that fight until it came out later that it was the robot. I went back. One thing the app did have for me were a few of the back issues that were referenced in the editor's notes there. And, that was early Dan Jurgens stuff. And when Superman was showing up in the Booster titles, I thought it was interesting that, to me, he seemed much more like the pre-crisis Superman. He was talking about, his galactic adventures and the languages he knew. I'm going, no, you don't. You're this guy from Smallville who, was, it's Earth that makes you human. That's you. What do you mean you've been out there having spacefaring adventures that we haven't read about? I just thought it was an interesting tidbit.
I wonder if that points towards some of those frustrations that Byrne had expressed that I talked about with Mike Carlin about kind of feeling this lack of support from DC for his version.
Yeah,
this isn't in the realm of
versus the version we license.
Yeah, I mean, and we're not in the realm of licensing here, but just this idea of the Superman appearing in another book, but adhering more closely to the traditional version as opposed to what Byrne was doing. So maybe that fed into that frustration. Honestly, this 2-parter with Booster kind of fell into the category that I was complaining about last week with a lot of these Action Comics team ups, where they were fine, they were fun, they were action packed, as the title suggested. But I didn't feel like offered a ton of great insight into the into the characters or their dynamic.
Oh, I mean, for the most part, I think action was just going to be action across these. Or at least it seemed to me that you were getting a lot of duking it out, beat 'em ups, but not necessarily a deep dive on characterization for the most part.
But what I liked here, so we see this here, and then this also comes up again in the issue of Action with Checkmate. So we talked last time about the issue of Adventures of Superman from year 1 of the Byrne era, where Superman invaded the country of Karak and basically took that country apart for being this terrorist hotbed. And as I talked about last week, it was kind of interesting, as much as I know it's been cited in the aftermath of the James Gunn movie. In the Gunn movie, Superman is so clear of purpose and other people are questioning him. In that Adventures of Superman issue, Superman is the one who is doubting whether or not this is the right path. And everyone around him is like, oh, you did a great job. That was wonderful. No. But here, what I like here in these couple of Action Comics issues that follow is that you have the what turns out to be the Booster Gold android calling Superman out about this. It's also, I forget exactly which issue or issues, but Morgan Edge starts speaking out against Superman and him inserting himself the way he did in international affairs. And in that Checkmate issue, you have the Ministry of Defense of Karak who's coming to denounce Superman at the United Nations. And then there ends up being a whole plot involving that. But just the fact that idea wasn't dropped and you actually got to see some sort of backlash, even though it never really gains much traction, but just the fact that the idea was explored, I appreciated that.
Yes, it was it's a strange time. Right around the time that I think the Joker was made the UN rep for Iran was when we were having these things with Karak and the Superman books, and the 80s were different.
Yeah. Yes.
So
yeah. And then I guess maybe arguably the most notable of these DCU intersections here during these issues comes in Action Comics 600, where we have this Superman Wonder Woman pairing. I mean, Superman has been pining after Wonder Woman for multiple issues now. after having this, I think, relatively brief encounter with her in the Legends crossover, but being very struck by her beauty. And the issue right before Action 600, they have this rendezvous and he just plants one on her.
Not allowed anymore. Wouldn't play today.
No, I mean, it's the way it's staged. It's like, you don't really, I don't know. It's just maybe like we're missing a beat or something, but it's like they land and then they're kissing. Like you don't actually, but yes, I think it's pretty clear. The implication is like he just plants one on her.
Yep.
Which yes, would not fly today. But yeah, so then you get this whole bit in Action 600 where they start to tentatively explore their feelings a little bit, but then they get pulled into this whole dark side plot. But at the end of it, Superman has this realization that kind of she's in a different realm than him, and this is not something that would really work. He's essentially a Kansas farm boy at heart. I don't know. How did all of this play for you? Did you find this sad? Were you interested in them exploring this generally, and then were you satisfied by the way they kind of put the genie back in the bottle with this?
I was interested in seeing what the back and forth was going to be. In the end, the most interesting parts of reading it now were watching Wonder Woman's publicist being very happy to print the legend and an outright lie to sell the papers and promote her clients. And second to that, watching what happened to Lois and her reaction to this headline. Nobody can even get on the phones to Boston. The switchboards are so busy, and how she is really feeling about that after trying to put the whole idea of being Superman's girlfriend to the side, and the emotional toll that took on her. So those were the parts that played best for me in the here and now. Yeah,
well said. I agree. I mean, I'll say on the Wonder Woman front, it just like when we hit this in the New 52, right? And when I finally read a lot of those issues, I enjoyed them, and I thought that pairing was interesting. It's not ultimately what I want for Superman, but it's something that's an intriguing idea, and you understand why there's something worth exploring there to some extent. Sure. So the fact that they broached this subject, I'm on board with. The fact that they ultimately put it to bed as quickly as they did, for whatever reason behind me, I don't know if this was always the plan or if it didn't align with what George Perez was doing with Wonder Woman in his book. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I didn't need it to go further, and I guess it's fine that we did this. I don't know. I guess I don't really feel that strongly about it. I agree with you. I think the kind of the impact that it has on Lois is far and away the most interesting, valuable part of this. And yeah, and that plays out later in Action 600, and you have Clark show up at Lois's apartment to try to offer some measure of comfort. And this is the point where things are still pretty icy between them, but you know, maybe a little bit of a thawing. And in that moment in particular, she invites him to stay for dinner. She's like, I'm going to go take a shower, like order a pizza. But then he gets that call from Jimmy Olsen from that other story that we talked about before. And she comes out and he's gone. And it's just like another, just another knock against him. So it's, that was something where I felt like, okay, I buy why this would cause further tension. Like that story, I like the way that played between them, and I'm glad you mentioned this bit about like Superman's girlfriend. I'm glad, in this post-crisis era, clearly Lois does have an interest in Superman, but it's not her driving motivation like we saw in a lot of those earlier like 50s and 60s stories. That didn't do the character a ton of favors. And in fact, she is somewhat known as quote unquote Superman's girlfriend, but it's a designation that was given to her by a rival newspaper as more of a dig. So, that going back to what you were saying before about aspects of pre-crisis kind of seeping back in, but in different ways, I feel like there's another example of it. And one that I think tracks for a more modern era where it's like, yeah, that's there, but it's not any kind of appellation she's chosen for herself.
Right.
Or would choose for herself.
Managed to sneak in the familiar term, but give it a modern twist. So. Yeah.
Now, there were also team-ups with Green Lantern in another one of those Millennium crossovers, and then there were issues with the Doom Patrol and the Metal Men. I told you this off mic, Tim. I love doing my homework, and I do my homework, but there are occasional issues that are kind of a quick skim for me. And those were in that category. So I don't really have anything on that front. If there's anything you have, feel free. Otherwise, we can jump to our next category.
And I told you off mic that I'd had trouble getting to my stash of hard copies of comics in the basement. But one thing I was able to find online, because I looked at that Green Lantern issue where Superman and Green Lantern are flying through the microverse there. And there are all of these incredibly drawn geometric shapes. And I thought, good Lord, circa 1987, how long did it take John Byrne to draw all of these out on his drawing board? And it turns out he did them on his computer. It was one of the very early examples of being able to use a computer for comic art to that purpose. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Oh, wild. That's interesting. Yeah. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one Smallville podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode, and the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner. I guess one of the other big categories here, and probably, out of everything, it's probably what I'm most interested in, the interpersonal dynamics. And I do feel like we get more of this here. Like some of these I had mentioned, little things too, like Jimmy befriending the homeless guy who lives outside his mother's house.
Yep.
And Jimmy's mother, the fact that she has not given up hope about Jimmy's father. And she sees a photo of the father with Perry White in Perry's office, right after the point in time where Jimmy's dad had disappeared. So this gives her renewed hope. There's the bit where she meets Superman and is very smitten. And man, Jimmy really into the idea of Superman banging his mom. I mean, he is like all about that.
So let's talk Jimmy for a minute, because we have, very young, attractive Mrs. Olsen as the mom, not wild about Jimmy being in a journalistic career. Superman also doesn't think Mrs. Olsen is too hard on the eyes. They take a bit of a shine to each other right off the bat. But the other thing that, boy, would not, to my mind, play today is Jimmy and Kat. Boy.
Yes. Well, okay. Well, the last thing I'll say on the note of Jimmy's mom is that, she has, so they make specific reference. Jimmy's not 21 yet. So he's like 20.
Yeah. Yep.
And she talks about having Jimmy when she was very young, I think 18 to 20, somewhere in that range.
Thereabouts. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they've got her with this full head of gray hair. It's like
lush silver locks. Yes.
Yeah. Now I say this as someone who is 38 and I've got a lot of gray myself. So I guess it's in, but I just feel like they made her look older than she really is or would look.
the hair certainly, but John Byrne with the right anchor can draw a pretty lady. No question about that. And that was fully on display here and with many of the other members of the cast.
Oh man, I don't know. Is it a missed opportunity to not have Superman and or Clark and Jimmy's mom? Or now on the other hand though, does that, because you want it, especially in this rebooted era of Superman, you want him to feel young and vibrant. It's like, does putting him in a potential stepdad role to Jimmy, I feel like that just ages him instantly.
I'm glad Jimmy looks up to Superman. I don't think that's a good pairing myself. Makes things a little awkward.
Yeah. Now on the Kat front. So All right. I'm glad that Byrne didn't drop her because I thought Wolfman and Ordway had done some nice work setting her up as a potential love interest for Clark in that first year of their adventures as Superman. And Byrne definitely continues the thread of her seeking custody of her son, Adam. There was that business introduced, and we see that continue here. But I feel like Byrne really puts any sort of potential Clark Cat romance to bed, like right from the jump. And there's one of the issues where she's kind of like all over him in the office, and he's like, "Cat, how many times have I told you I'm not interested or don't do that?" Yeah. So, and then it's not too long after that where we have a quasi-romantic pairing with Cat and Jimmy, despite about a 10-year age difference.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that struck me most in terms of the storytelling is that, they make it clear that Jimmy has this thing for Cat, and she does not want to give him the time of day. And he's even asking her kid for pointers on how to get mom's attention. And then we get to the beginning of the Kilgrave issue, and they're back at her apartment, and she may have had a little much to drink. And okay, maybe some bad judgments being made, but the clincher is the next issue forward. I think it's the Doom Patrol issue where she's at the office and she is all over Jimmy's desk. Whoa, this was a pretty quick switch from Cat not having any interest in Jimmy to being all over him.
Yeah, I mean, and look, he's in his 20s, so it's just because there's an age difference. But yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a flip, and yeah, she does become pretty quickly like sexually aggressive towards him, and she's trying to get him to drink in that episode when they're at her apartment, and he's the one who's like, "Oh, I'm underage." But yeah, to your point, then that next one where she's like really, kind of on top of him at the office. Yeah, there's this bit about has she been drinking. And so I guess that's pointing more towards, so I feel like maybe kind of some of her behavior or all of her behavior towards Jimmy might stem from this kind of growing problem that she has. I don't know. I mean, it's not something, a pairing between the two of them is not something I would just kind of automatically discount just because of the age difference. It's definitely a complicating factor, but open-minded. But yeah, I think kind of the way it plays in terms of the aggression, the drinking, it just kind of puts a different color on it. And is unexpected, and it's more unexpected because it's already been established Jimmy's with Lucy and has been with Lucy. Yeah. And Kat even references that. So it's like, what
I know all about her little sister. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't know. Ultimately, I don't put this on Kat. It's like, Jimmy, like, what you doing here, man?
Yep. I guess it's good that Tracy Scoggins figured out they were related, so it all worked out in the end.
I'll have a lot. We're coming. I've got a lot to say about Cat Grant in Lois and Clark. But oh man, so if we're talking about potential romantic pairings here, so Clark and Cat that gets dropped. Clark and Jimmy, that's a different story.
Oh boy,
Cat and Jimmy, that's we address that, but we get a retelling of the classic pre-crisis Lori Lemaris story.
Yep.
Yeah, what did you make of this? We visit with Clark in his college days, and again, it's a very faithful retelling of that pre-crisis story.
Okay, I'm gonna tell the truth here. And when I picked up that comic book when I was 11 years old or whatever, there's that panel where her wheelchair is running away, and Clark has to use his heat vision to melt the wheels to stop it, and he catches her. "Don't worry, I've got you." And then she looks at him with the eyes as green as the sea, and she got me. And I remember looking at that panel and going, "Wow, what a beautiful." Of course she did, and I really enjoyed that story. It was interesting to look at Byrne's framing device as Superman has gone to meet her husband, or her widower, to tell the story. So one of the whales can spin it into a whale song that will last as long as the world. So I thought that was a very poetic way to do it. It was a little strange to going back to Superman Returns here, Clark using his X-ray vision to check in on what's going on with the girlfriend who always has to be back to her trailer by 11 p.m. But all in all, an issue that holds a lot of nostalgic value for me.
Yeah, it's It's funny, we talk about our way into all of these characters. Like, I met Lori later on in the Triangle era where she was brought back, and that ended up causing a bit of, had legs on land, and caused a bit of, this played into the growing tension between Lois and Clark that resulted in their broken engagement. You know, there's that moment where Superman is flying with Lori and a kiss is had between them. So that was how I met the character. And then years later, I would go back to this Byrne story. And then it was after that I realized that it was a retelling of a pre-crisis tale. Yeah. And I mean, it's like, it's interesting to me that for this era where it was such an attempt to move forward, and we're discarding so much of the pre-crisis mythology, not only to bring something back, but to retell the story. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of curious. It's not a critique. It's fine, but it's just kind of interesting. It's an interesting choice to me in light of the realm that we're in.
And I think maybe, hopefully I'm remembering this right, because I did listen to your interview with Mike Carlin earlier in the week, talking about how he felt, correct me if I get this wrong, that one of the genius things that Byrne did was you got to meet all these older characters for the first time. And this could be your entry point into what you might not otherwise have access to. So in that way, I think a good move on his part.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Look, it also, it further plays into this post-crisis Clark is a ladies' man angle.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like the character, but I think you're spot on. I think that that probably accounts for it. And I've always liked the character of Lori. I mean, the business that they can't be together because she's a mermaid and she belongs to the sea. I mean, it's interesting. It's a different spin. I mean, in this post-crisis era, it's, again, I still think this is a weird choice, but Clark really looks at Lana in more of a brotherly way. So she's not the contender that she could and arguably should be. But so, you know, the Lori angle is interesting to me because it's like they're only not together because they can't be. Shades of Smallville Requiem.
Right.
If you know, you know. But yeah, I mean, and I just like the idea of a college era love interest, because we have Lana on the high school side, we have Lois in his adult life, but in this in-between period, and stories that, well, other stories like that World of Metropolis miniseries, and then later stories that will come in the Triangle era, we'll pepper in more love interest for him along the way. But I like the idea of Lana, then Lori, then Lois. And going back to Smallville, it will forever drive me nuts that they never introduced Lori. For as long as that show went on, and it's a WBCW show, it's like, come on. Like, I feel like this would have been perfect for them.
They got Aquaman, they could have gotten Lori. But
yeah.
My favorite moment with Lori in any medium at all, the Superman Confidential series, and I won't take us too far afield here, but there were a couple of issues where she showed up, and the tail end of the story is her and Clark walking through a park together, and you know, he gets an emergency call and he has to go away, and he's, you know, presumably out of earshot after he's taken off to go save the day. And it's just Lori looking after him saying, Lois Lane is the luckiest girl in the world. And yep, that sums up the whole Clark Lori thing for me. Yeah.
I don't know. We sometimes manifest things. I don't know. Maybe there's something that could be done with Lori down the line. I feel like it's, you know, not creating a wedge between Clark and Lois in the present, but I don't know. Maybe we got stories of young Superboy in Action Comics. I mean, that's a little not quite in Lori territory yet, but I don't know. Maybe we could work out something there.
Yeah, as long as we don't head in that year one direction, we'll be all right.
Oh God, the Frank Miller thing! Don't get me started on that.
It's a different spin on Lori.
You know, I have a couple of other things on the personal side, but while we're talking about Clark's romances, like Lois and Kat and Lori and Lana, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me about the Byrne era, like these 2 years specifically, is that, especially in the first year, we don't spend a ton of time with Clark in his civilian identity. I feel like in these issues, we got to start to spend a little bit more time with him. I feel like a lot of it previously was kind of more in that realm of telling and not showing. There's a lot of talk about what a hunk he is. Like, we hear that from Kat, certainly, but from Lois as well. She remarks about his physique. And that he's this ace reporter, and people comment on his novels. So we're told a lot about kind of what an all-star guy he is, but it's not like you really see him investigating stories or standing up to anyone. And so again, I appreciate that we got to spend more time with him now, and that we're veering away from more of the telling and we're seeing a little bit more of the showing. And the other thing too, because, I spent a lot of time with the George Reeves television series. Yeah. It's like, that was such a cited influence of Byrne and Wolfman and Ordway and Carlin. And I see it in the sense that there's very little to no differentiation between the Clark and Superman personas. And that, I would argue, is very much in keeping with the George Reeves series.
Yeah.
There are moments here and there in the show where George's Clark will feign, like, I'm nervous or not feeling well, but they're few and far between. He's so confident and direct and authoritative and commanding. And I guess I would have expected to see a little bit more of that flair from Clark in these pages. I'm not really seeing that, but as far as the Reeves comparison, I really think it is more that lack of differentiation between the personas that I see more than anything else.
He's a cool guy, Anthony. He's got to be an 80s tough guy, sensitive, all of those things that, he needed to be for the day.
Yeah, I know. It's funny too, because I like going back to this idea of comparison and perspective. It's like, I'm sure he felt at that point in time in the late 80s, like very much more youthful and energetic and vibrant than perhaps he had been before. But it's like through a modern lens, he reads as I think a lot older still than he's probably meant to. But I also think that that's more a function of the time. Like I use this example a lot, but the Friends television series, which I love, one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. And it's like they're early to mid 20s at the beginning of that show, but it's like, and there are different stages of their careers, but a good number of them, they're established in their careers. They're in suits all the time. They have their own places to live, even if they have roommates still. But like, they feel a lot further along as young 20-somethings than I feel like 20-somethings today, right? Like, I feel like you look at those Friends episodes and you would probably think, like, oh, they must be in their 30s. So I feel like the view of adulthood and standards for adulthood have shifted a lot, right?
Absolutely. And I think, what was he supposed to be, 29 maybe in Man of Steel? Am I remembering that right? I don't think
he's even meant to be quite that old, because I'd have to go back and do the math of how many years I meant to have passed. But yeah, maybe. Like I would say, maybe 25 to 29, like in that range.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, when you can move at super speed, I guess you can do a lot.
Yeah, I suppose. Do you like the Lois and Jose Delgado pairing?
I like that she is there to support him. Especially after things, go so badly with Combatter. I liked that she went to the movies with him and was finding herself attracted to him in a way that maybe she didn't expect to be before that night. And then once she realized what a real hero he was, that she was, over his vocal protests in the hospital, she was not going to abandon him, and she was going to be there. And I'm going to go ahead and say, make him feel like he was still a man after the accident, and not let him down. Yeah, no,
absolutely. So it's one of those pairings I feel like often forgotten in the grand scheme of things, but interesting in that moment. And if the choice is between her continuing to give Clark the cold shoulder and not have any movement versus pairing her with someone who's a viable option and kind of opens up another side of her character. Yeah, I'm all for that. And yeah, especially when you see her, come to his side and kiss him in the hospital and then bring him home. And so Jose is in a wheelchair. I mean, he's in a cast and his arm's in a sling. I mean, he's still all like extremely banged up. She carries him up the stairs in his wheel. I mean, it's quite the feat.
She works out. She's a modern woman, 80s strong. So
yeah. And then he's like, I'll make coffee. And she's letting, I was like, make the coffee. This guy's only got one working arm here. But no, he was trying to prove himself and all that. But,
yes. Did you happen to read the miniseries from a few years back, One Star Squadron?
No.
I'm not going to necessarily say that, go out and grab it right away. But it, as far as I know, kind of put the final chapter on the Jose Delgado story and where things ended up for him in the end. So just a footnote.
It sounds like we might be doing a Justice for Gangbuster episode.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All right. And then the last kind of big thing that I had on my list here is Maggie Sawyer. And I feel like this is, kind of, because all the cat stuff and Jose, that had been set up by Wolfman and Ordway in Adventures, but Maggie and Dan Turpin, the SCU, that was more in the pages of Byrne's books. And so to see that develop where now Maggie is in a relationship with the woman Toby, and her Maggie's young daughter has gone missing and ends up in Metropolis and has been taken by the villain Skyhook. And Lex gets this dirt on Maggie about her sexual orientation and tries to leverage that against her, and she stands her ground. I mean, I thought all of that was great.
I did too. I don't think I understood all of it back when I was first reading it, but looking at it now, the Skyhook issue, particularly, in the thought bubbles where they come right up close to saying out loud, and then Superman will get distracted by something else that he has to do. And then Luthor calling Maggie into his office and bringing his very pretty assistant in to underscore the point that they have, his words, similar tastes. So all of it really good. And then I had forgotten the tail end of the second Superman annual. I think it was maybe the last of the Byrne showing where, Turpin has gotten hurt in the hospital. Maggie comes to visit him every day. He thinks that there's a romantic interest in there, quickly comes to realize that's not the case, but everybody's still going to work together and have that deep, abiding respect for each other. And just a really good message for that time in particular.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if a young reader might look at this and be like, well, why don't they just say she's a lesbian? It's like, this was a different time. And I think credit where credit's due, the fact that they had a gay character, and even broached the subject. And I think, even if those constraints shouldn't have been there, and I agree they shouldn't have been, they should have been able to just kind of say what was going on. But it's like, I think it played exactly to your point where, if you were a kid reading this, stuff would just kind of go over your head, but like reading it as an adult, you get what they're saying. And just the fact that they explore this territory, and you saw, especially in that Action 600, when Dan is talking to Maggie after, and like, you see, he has her back. And I just thought it was interesting, like very ahead of its time.
Yep. So really well done.
Yeah. I mean, look, overall, would I say that I think John Byrne has the best handle on the female characters of these books? No, I wouldn't. But this was an exception to that. I thought, I like the work that was done there. You mentioned Lex and his assistant. I don't know that we really hit on this in these episodes, but Lex forever surrounded by these beautiful, his chauffeur, his assistants, the scientists. It's his thing.
Everybody in a low cut top, everybody in a mini skirt and high heels. That's the dress coordinate. LexCorp.
And this is the stretch where he develops the kryptonite poisoning because of the ring and loses his hand. I mean, this is, you talk about, once again, the legacy in Smallville, right? Whenever we would get those glimpses of Lex in the future, it was always that glove on that hand. That was how you knew we were in future evil dark Lex mode. I mean, like this was the thing. Good
stuff, further reaching than anybody knew.
For sure. Now, I guess that's a perfect segue to kind of the villain side of things. So we have the introduction, the first ever introduction of, not just in the post-crisis era, but first ever Silver Banshee. She makes a couple of appearances here. We have the post-crisis introductions of Toyman, Prankster, Titano, and the Milton Fine version of Brainiac, the circus mentalist, who is possessed by the alien mind of Vril Dox from the planet Kolu. And we also have the return of Mixus Pitalik, who had debuted in the previous stories that we looked at. And then new villains, Skyhook and Siphon and Dreadnought from the Power Failure two-parter, where they're seemingly stealing away the powers of Superman and the other heroes. It turns out they're actually using a mental block that prevents the heroes from accessing it. But that leads to a great bit where Clark goes to Professor Emil Hamilton, rehabilitated after his villainous actions in the previous story, and obtains the force field that Hamilton had been working on. And Clark actually, you know what? I'll walk back what I said before. If there's anything that was George Reeves-esque, like it was Clark, not Superman.
Man of action.
Getting in there. Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have to pour through all of those, but I guess of those villain outings, I mean, what stood out to you the most? What did you enjoy?
So, on the subject of Skyhook, another one that creeped me out.
Out of all the ones that you were going to go to, I wasn't expecting Skyhook.
Going there in part because just coming back to the Vampire Annual with Batman, one of the things that struck me about all three of the annuals, Vampire, Titano, and then I'm blanking on his name right now, but I've got it written down here somewhere. The body horror aspect of all three of those, that was a departure for Superman. And similarly in the Skyhook issue, the creepy cocooning of the children. And at the end of the issue, Maggie's daughter pulling some bit of goo off her arm that makes the snapping noise, and the hint that, okay, maybe this is not as over as everybody thinks for her. So, that was suitably creepy and kept me engaged as a kid. I did not love the Titano issue. I thought the ending of the other one, where Superman has to explore the abandoned town where all the people have disappeared and what's happening, and then all of their brains in jars underground, and they're able to communicate with him telepathically, and that first of all, very early Dan Jurgens Superman art, that was interesting to look back and go, oh, this was where it's all started for him. And then that really creepy moment where the collective consciousness of the town, you're wondering what to do with us, aren't you? And they take him over to shut down the life support. So all of these things that I wasn't used to getting out of a Superman comic, and still find a little Twilight Zone unsettling even in the here and now. So I thought those were interesting touches, interesting new places to take the character. As far as the other villains, I think the thing that stood out to me the most about the Toyman and the Prankster issues were the really fun things Byrne was doing with perspective. So that Toyman issue opens up and we're ground level eye view with this toy tank that's in front of a armored car. And then, this is presumably an all ages kids comic book back in the day. The security guard picks up the tank and boom, off with his head, explodes the entire armored car to get all of the money out. So that type of thing. Or the crazy soap bubble attack on Metropolis that the prankster puts into play. And he's, Superman trying to stop the bus and can't do it when the ground is too slick to get purchased. So all those things I thought were really fun ways to play with these concepts that, maybe a little older, maybe a little dated, but we're going to do something new and a little more edgy with them. So I enjoyed them for that.
Yeah, well said. I'll co-sign on that. I mean, on the Toyman front, was that the real Toyman, or is that one of his androids from the Jeff Johns?
Oh boy, I'm hoping it's Winslow shot back in the day, but fingers crossed. Yeah, I think it was just the Rogue one that got away, right? The one.
But no, I agree with all that. I mean, it's funny. I've only ever invested so much in Toyman, but Prankster is one who's sort of always just felt extraneous and unnecessary to me. Yeah. But I enjoyed this issue. I feel like Prankster's a character I would be open to kind of exploring in greater depth down the line. There might be more value there. I certainly enjoyed that issue. I have to say, 'cause I've never been, and I know I'm on record, I've never been the biggest Silver Banshee fan. Mm-hmm. I'm coming around. Around on the family history, the lore, the look. And I think what's gone a long way is the current Superman title, where she's in a relationship with Jimmy Olsen. and she's been rehabilitated. I don't know. I'm more invested in that character than I have been before. So going back to these early appearances, I'm like, okay, I'm more on board with this.
I really love the first appearance. I love it not just for, okay, new character, new villain, but when everybody in Metropolis thinks Superman is dead, and seeing the outpouring of people waiting to walk by, and the white ghost of Superman rising out of the display case, and Perry White, great scissors, and stopping himself before he gets that word ghost out, and just the interplay there I thought was really well done. And watching how Lois reacted to the news, watching how Luthor reacted to the news, Lois in tears, Luthor beside himself, that Superman was supposed to die at my hand, not anybody else.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like more and more just John Byrne as the blueprint, to quote our pal Zach Moore, this idea of the blueprint, because I mean, the early precursor to the death of Superman and a lot of those same dynamics. Yeah. Well, it's funny. We were joking off mic, but I feel like the Silver Banshee issue, that first one in particular, is a perfect example where you go through the whole thing and then you get like a couple pages at the end, just like massive exposition dump about what this was all about. And I feel like of all of John Byrne's storytelling devices and ticks, that's one that really kind of grew a bit irksome. Were those heavy exposition dumps at the ends of issues? It just, I don't know. I understand. I mean, I think in some instances, maybe we don't need everything spelled out, but where we do, maybe there's a more elegant way to kind of weave it throughout, as opposed to like, because I feel like you get to the end of the issue, it's like you want to end strong, and I just feel like it grinds to a halt, and it's like, okay, now the characters are going to sit and talk and explain what all of this was about.
Yeah. Now, I think in the here and now, if the Byrne issues were being put out today, the trope of Superman sitting inside the windowsill in Maggie Sawyer's office explaining everything would be memeified a lot.
Yes. Yeah, that's probably true. I mentioned Emil Hamilton. He off panel builds a Superman robot.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah. One that's lifelike enough to fool everybody. And I don't know about all that. Seems a bit much for Emil.
Yeah, seems a bit much, but just another example of a pre-crisis element coming back and then quickly being discarded, right? I think Superman's takeaway is like, nope, this didn't work. Yeah. And then one other follow-up mentioning the George Reeves series, because this really hasn't come up yet, but these books incorporate Inspector Bill Henderson.
Yeah, nice to see him show up.
Nice to see him there. Yeah. Originally from the radio show. Mm-hmm. I didn't say that in one of my George Reeves episodes on my other podcast, and I got a lot of corrections.
Oh, dear.
Originally from the radio show, but popularized and brought to life by actor Robert Shane in the George Reeves series. And we see him here. I mean, in a world where we've got Perry and we've got Maggie and we've got Dan, I don't know how much Bill Henderson really adds, but he's there.
Yeah. Nice to name check.
He's there. And then the Milton Fine Brainiac. I mean, this is really just early days of the Milton Fine Brainiac. We're going to have a lot more. We've talked about Brainiac a lot in the past, and we're going to have a lot more to say, especially because I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in James Gunn's DCU before too long. But I don't know. It's weird. Like that's my Brainiac that I grew up with. But then I think for a while now, I've kind of been in the camp of, I don't know that this is the most effective version of the character, but I don't know. I feel like I'm coming back around on him. So we'll see.
I really enjoyed that issue a lot more than I thought I would. And I have my memory of going, okay, this is not the metal terror that I remembered. And, but all of the, him struggling to keep everything under control, the girlfriend who doesn't quite believe in him, everything going on at the circus, the negative color word balloons, all of it worked a little bit better for me now than I think it did back then.
Yeah. And I think also too, like we know where it's going, and we're going to get to that Brainiac trilogy that Roger Stern writes not too far from now, where he'll end up with that green skinned look and that will carry him through Panic in the Sky and Dead Again and other stories. And so I think this version comes into sharper focus. I mean, this is really, really just tentative first steps of the character. All right. Shall we get to the big finale, this 3-part Supergirl saga?
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So Byrne's unintended farewell from the title. And as I talked about with Mike Carlin, it's apparently unknown what Byrne was planning to do after this because of how abruptly he exited, which is, this is not a knock on Mike Carlin at all, but I say to myself, like, man, I don't know if that were me in charge of greenlighting these stories, I think I would need to know, like, all right, what you got planned after this? Sounds good. Sounds interesting. You got to give me a little heads up.
Well, and forgive me for going back a couple weeks there, but wasn't it when Jeff Loeb was on your show, he said, you had to know how you were going to get in and how you were going to get out.
Yeah, I guess the rules had changed by then. Yeah. Maybe after this, they were like, listen, from now on.
Give us your exit strategy.
Yeah. So in terms of the setup of this, we have, and actually they set this up over a number of issues leading up to the Supergirl saga, where a very classic looking Supergirl is found buried beneath the ice in Antarctica, apparently there for hundreds of years, giving off intense heat. She's brought up, fading in and out of consciousness, doesn't really have her memories. Eventually she flies off. She makes her way to Smallville. She encounters Lana and the Kent and ends up tying them up. And then she intercepts Superman at the beginning of this saga. And she reveals herself, she shapeshifts and reveals herself to be Lana, much to Superman's surprise. And it also becomes clear from the jump that though she is wearing the Superman emblem and she's flying, that her powers are operating differently. Certainly the shapeshifting is an indication of that. Superman relatively quickly, kudos to him, I thought, deduces that this isn't the Lana of his Earth, but rather the Lana of the Pocket Universe that we had met in the greatest hero of them all crossover with the Legion that we talked about last time. This Pocket Universe created by the Legion villain Time Trapper that included Clark as Superboy and the classic pre-crisis version of Smallville. And when the Legion traveled back in time, they weren't traveling back in time on their own Earth. They were being diverted to this Pocket Universe. And that's how the Legion had adventures with Clark as Superboy. And this Supergirl's memories are still kind of coming back into focus, but essentially she remembers enough that she's there to enlist Superman's help. And I think what sort of helps snap her out of this fog that she's in is, she's talking about Lex Luthor and how he gave her powers and everything.
Greatest hero in the world.
And he's this greatest hero. And that Metropolis is destroyed. So Superman takes her to our Metropolis and our Lex Luthor, and she sees. And so she, quote unquote, wakes up enough, and then they're transported back to this Pocket Universe, and they meet this heroic Lex Luthor and Pete Ross, who's part of this resistance, as well as the Pocket Universe versions of Bruce Wayne and Hal Jordan and Oliver Queen. And we get the backstory. It turns out that after the greatest hero of them all, after that, Earth's Superboy died and they're all in mourning, the Lex of that universe, who is good, came upon the time viewing device and received in Superboy's lab and received a message from General Zod, Zaora, and Quexel, if I'm saying that right.
Yep.
And they claimed that they had been placed in the survival zone to escape Krypton's destruction. And Lex, figuring that this is an opportunity to bring Kryptonian heroes to the world to replace Superboy, frees them. But of course, it wasn't the survival zone. It was the Phantom Zone, and they were villains who were in prison. And they subjugate the Earth and eradicate almost all life on Earth. They tunnel to the molten core of the Earth. They boil the seas. It destroys the atmosphere. Life on Earth is completely decimated, but for Smallville, which exists within this dome that Lex has created. So Superman has been brought in to help save the day. And I think we all know where this is ultimately going, right? Because this is the famous cover of Superman 22 with Superman and the Executioner hood with that glowing green cover. Because this is the issue where Superman uses gold kryptonite from Superboy's lab to strip the Kryptonian criminals of their powers. It had already been established in that prior crossover that the kryptonite, any shade on that universe, doesn't affect our Superman. So he uses gold kryptonite to strip them of their powers and then uses green kryptonite to execute them. What do you make of this?
So I'm sure you have talked a lot about the Pocket Universe in a yet to be released episode.
Yes.
I, as a kid, loved the Pocket Universe. because it was this really, to my mind, legitimate, grown up way to try to make sense of why we would still be able to have a Legion and bring back a few of these things that, hey, at a minimum, it was going to let Superman fight Superboy, and that makes for a good issue of comics for me. So loved that. Was sorry to see how it ended for the Superboy of the Pocket Universe. And then we come here and we've got Lex. And the first thing I loved about, how the story ended up is that, well, our Lex does not become the villain that we knew him as in the pre-crisis universe. He still has the fatal flaw of not being able to get out of his own way, to have the need to be recognized as the greatest and the best and the one who will save everyone, save the world. And it just backfires for Lex every time. But one of the things that delighted me as I would, get older and read other comics from pre-crisis. Okay, if we're looking at that famous Elliot Magan issue, the Luthor that nobody knows, where they tell Lex's origin and his great creation. It wasn't just that he was fooling around in his laboratory that Superboy built for him before the fire. He was working on creating life. And so if things had gone better for him back then, this is what gives us our Matrix Supergirl now. Lex was successful in doing that and could have helped people if not for the accident. So all of those things I thought very clever of how Byrne approached that material, made our way forward. Central question I think we're getting at here is the death.
Yeah. Well, while that continues to marinate, I just want to pick up on what you said. Because I agree. I think, we all gravitate towards the execution of the criminals. But the Lex side is really interesting because, he's the one who he purposely frees them, but for what he believes to be, I think he's doing a good thing. And that proves not to be the case. But when we get to the climax of the story, he's the one who gives Superman the idea to use the gold kryptonite. But Superman says, why did you not use this? And it's like he didn't want to rely on that. He wanted to try to clean up the mess on his own. And it's like, well, it cost 5 billion people their lives. World. So it's like, he wasn't villainous in the sense that we traditionally associate with Lex, but he definitely had his failings. And that's a key part of this. And one by one throughout the story, the human survivors fall. And Supergirl herself, turns out she wasn't actually the Lana of that pocket universe given powers. Lex reveals that Lana died very early on, but he used her molecular, wait for it, matrix to essentially program this proto-matter to form the being we now know as Supergirl. And after she gets blasted in the battle, she reverts to that basic protoplasmic state. And that's what Superman is able to recover and bring back to the Kent farm at the end of the story. And he entrusts Jonathan and Martha and Lana with caring for the character we'll come to know as the Matrix Supergirl.
Right.
This is another instance. Next year, in the lead up to the movie, we're going to have so much to say about Supergirl. We're going to talk more about her. But yes, all that being said, yes, the execution of the villains. How do you feel about it? And how did you feel about it at the time? I'm more curious about that, actually.
At the time, I remember vividly picking up the issue and reading it in my parents' car while they were in the grocery store. And I found it to be a satisfying ending at the time as a kid. Made sense to me that this would happen in this way. Was not super jarred by him having to take this step. Was looking forward to seeing what Byrne would do in the next issue, in fact, but didn't know that he was off the books because they don't tell you that when you're 12. But all week long, as I've been thinking, Anthony and I are going to be talking about this, and Anthony really loves that ending of Man of Steel with General Zod dying, and some of Anthony's guests give him a lot of heat for his love of Man of Steel and that ending. And how are we going to square this with, if I'm okay with it here, why am I not as okay with it there? So, having given it that thought, what I'd say is that for me, the difference is that it is not a heat of the moment decision. And you hear, your thought experiments about, well, if you could find Hitler as a baby in his crib, would you stop him from ever growing to know the things that you know he would do? I like to think that maybe Henry Cavill's Superman held out hope until the very end that maybe Zod wouldn't do all the things that he said he would do, and that he wouldn't have to literally break with his heritage that way. But Superman of the Pocket Universe has to contend with a dead planet where 3 Kryptonians, who are all more powerful than he could ever hope to be when fully charged, have willingly annihilated this world. And the other thing that kept coming to mind is that we know from the first Pocket Universe story that Superman doesn't know, or he does know, that none of the forms of kryptonite from that universe will affect him. I don't think it's ever established that he knows what all of the different shades of kryptonite do. I think Lex informs him in this story, get the gold kryptonite, that will take their powers away, the end. But he probably doesn't have any knowledge of what the red one does, or the blue one, or the white one. So when Zod and friends make the threat that we will find a way to get our powers back, and we will come to your world and done what you can see we have done here, he can't take that chance, because he knows if they were ever to regain their full power set, he would never be able to stop them. And for that reason, if no other, the reason that he can't risk our world going down the same path that the Pocket Universe Earth went, he has to do that in that moment.
All right. No, your points are all well taken. I mean, it's funny because I agree with you. To me, the distinction between this and the Man of Steel movie is exactly what you said. The difference between it being more thought out and calculated versus in the heat of the moment. At the end of the day, though, I don't know. Well, certainly I've made my peace with the Man of Steel side of things, and I don't begrudge Henry Cavill's Clark the decision he makes in that moment to save that family. As much as I know folks might be like, oh, you could have flown him into the sun. I like I've said a million times, I really think the intention of that scene, whether it came across or not, I think the intention of that scene was kill Zod or that family's going to die in that moment. And I don't begrudge Clark the choice he made. But at the same time, I don't know, and especially upon reread, it's like, yeah, I don't know how much I can really begrudge Clark the choice he makes in the Supergirl saga either, for the reasons you laid out. I mean, here's the thing. After they're depowered and imprisoned, the Kryptonian criminals are talking about how we'll get out. We'll find a way to get our powers back. We'll come to your Earth. I guess in the past, where I've been a little bit less generous towards the Byrne story, I think I felt like, well, how would they possibly do that? But like, in fairness, if Clark really put stock in what they said, and there may very well be validity to that. I mean, my God, we've read enough comic book stories. There's always some way. So to whatever extent Clark believed that there was any validity to their threats, coupled with the staggering death toll at their hands, 5 billion people, an entire planet, it's so extreme. And the other thing too, in Clark's defense, is what else could he have really done with them? It's like he could have just left them and then they starved to death. I don't know. Right. Arguably, it's more humane to just put them out of their misery instantly as opposed to that. or what, brought them to Earth to put them in prison, but then you are just inviting,
Right.
You're inviting a problem. So I think ultimately I'm more or less okay with the choice that he makes, but just as I'm equally okay, I'm more okay with the choice in Man of Steel. However, the bigger thing with both stories is kind of the stories themselves putting Superman in that position. And while I remain a defender of the Man of Steel movie, and you know this from the episodes and our off mic exchanges and all that stuff, I continue to admit that I really do think that movie suffered for not having a setup for that scene. And I've talked about this many times, but there was a scene in the script that wasn't filmed that would have been a flashback between Clark and Jonathan on a hunting trip. And there's a deer or some other animal that's injured and dying. And there's this talk about essentially putting it out of its misery. And Pa has this whole thing about, putting an animal down to put it out of its misery and taking life in that context. And the idea was to sort of draw that line and set up for what Clark will ultimately do with Zod. So in terms of setup, I think there was something missing there, because whether or not he's going to kill was never a question in that movie. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, it will forever, I think, be a missed opportunity in the Snyderverse series of films. We never saw that unpacked. As much as Henry Cavill went around in interviews saying, well, Superman would never kill again, clearly it's like, man, I don't know that. And when we get to the Snyder cut of Justice League, I mean, he is just savagely pummeling Steppenwolf and searing off his ear and all this stuff. And it's like, or his horn. So, even after watching those movies as many times as I have, it's like, no, it's not clear to me what Superman's takeaway was from that killing. Whereas on the comic book side, and no, this wasn't Byrne, this was the subsequent creators, but they took Superman on that journey in exile through space, where he was really dealing with his guilt over what he had done and this ultimate resolution that he'll never do that again. So you got the other side of that in the comic book, on the comic book side. But the last thing, as far as whether or not him killing the criminals was set up, that's the only thing that I feel would have added to this story, because thus far in the proceedings, and it's never really come up all that much about, this hard line about killing or that. And on top of all of that, like we've been saying, had there been more of a connection point between the Byrne Superman and his Kryptonian heritage, I think this could have resonated a lot more. But like we're saying, because that was so discarded, I feel like you lost so I honestly, with the Byrne story, I really think, and I know I've been going on a bit, I appreciate you listening to me go on.
Not at all.
But I really think it was just kind of I would have appreciated more setup in terms of the moral code and the fact that this is a line he firmly has decided he's not going to cross, and then he's put in this position. And hand in hand with that, had there been more of that connection with the Kryptonian side, I just think him having to kill Kryptonians would have been a bigger deal, like it was in the Man of Steel movie, where he, really was making this choice between his two worlds.
Right. I wonder, just 2 points of interest for me at the end of Action Comics 600, when you mentioned Man-Bat comes upon him and he's delirious from the radiation. One thing that stood out to me that I'd forgotten was, well, he's in his delirium. We have Superman shouting repeatedly, monster, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. And that's, a step away from who we thought we knew. And then at the end of 22, when he flies off and says that he needs time to think, he says, and all of these people walking around unaware that their doppelgangers have been annihilated, and to them, I am still Superman, the untarnished champion of humanity. And part of me I've heard stories and interviews where, the actors who portray Superman on screens big and small, or said, do you feel any way about how you have to behave in your personal life, because you are the embodiment of this character to the world? And to the extent that the actual hero of our story feels like, not only do I not want to kill because it's the wrong thing to do, but I have to be who people need me to be their champion. It's multifaceted.
Yeah, no, it is. And I guess, I like to argue against myself sometimes too. And I think maybe there's a case to be made on the Byrne comic book front in terms of that lack of setup. is that like this was to borrow a legal term, like this was a case of first impression. It's like a case of first impression. It's like this wasn't something that, I mean, maybe if Superman had been asked, do you kill? He would have said no. And maybe there's some line in one of these issues where I'm not saying it never came up ever, but they never made that particular a point about it that I can recall in going through all of these issues recently. So yeah, I mean, maybe the point of the story is like, yeah, this issue hasn't been forced, and now it is. Like now it's coming up, and now he's going to make that line for himself. Right. So, so maybe, yes, it does kind of feel like it comes out of nowhere, but it's like, well, this is a new challenge that he's presented with. I will say too that, because like we don't know what Byrne was going to do, right? But I think the fact that it ends on as somber a note as it does, and Superman's flying away, and he says like, I need time to think. And you quoted a lot of what he's kind of thinking in those thought bubbles at the end. Would it have been the Exile storyline? Probably not. But I feel like I want to give Byrne the benefit of the doubt. And I think the way this ends, I feel like it showed to me an intention to explore this guilt and the aftermath in some way. And I would have been curious to see what his version would have been. But I'm sorry, you were starting to say something. I cut you off.
Oh, no. No, agreed on all points. I think it would have been interesting, and probably there would have been some darkness in what followed. Whether or not it would get us to the point of exile, I don't know it. But I enjoyed it for what it was, and it was one of those capstone issues of my childhood. So I'll always hold it near and dear for that.
I mean, mine too. I mean, I've talked about how I didn't read this whole era until much more recently, but I had select issues that I picked up in back issue bins, and that cover of 22 was one of them.
Yeah.
It's funny. I can't help but wonder if that's that. I mean, I can't say that issue made like an indelible mark upon me when I read it as a kid, but I don't know. I still read it at an early point in my journey. I can't help but wonder if that's part of why maybe I wasn't as put off with the Man of Steel movie.
Yeah, could very much well be.
Where it's like, yeah, in certain circumstances, this is a step that he will take.
Yes.
Which is generally the position that I've had. I think the bigger, more important question becomes, when and why and how stories put him in that spot.
Right.
Not that there's no circumstance under which he would ever do that. Although we've talked about stories like the Joe Kelly stories where it's like, no, he will not break. And like, that's the character. So different interpretations, but yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. It's the other thing too, this wasn't meant to be his last story, but I think in a way there's something kind of fitting about it being his last one, because when you look at these 2 years on the Superman titles, at most you had like a 2-part story. There weren't these huge epics. The other biggest story was that 4-part greatest hero of them all crossover, which introduced the pocket universe. So the idea that what ended up being his final story tied back to what really was, at least in terms of issues and magnitude, like the biggest story of the era. I don't know, something kind of fitting about that.
And who knows, of course, but it's hard for me to imagine him ending on a more powerful note than the one that he did.
Yeah. But it's funny. I mean, you read these and it's like, yeah, this clearly was not meant to be the end. I mean, I think it's in part 1 of the Supergirl saga where Jimmy's going to go overseas to investigate where his dad might be. Yeah. And Perry's like, Lois, you're going with him. And, or even all the business with Milton Fine. Like he's in the psychiatric hospital. The girlfriend is kind of giving up on him. I think she gets hit by a car or something on the last one.
Got taken out very quickly.
Yeah. And obviously these things will continue under the pen of the subsequent creative teams, but it's like, yeah, clearly he was setting these things up, so there's some dangling threads there as we wrap this up.
But hey, all of that material over such a short amount of time. I know he's voiced in interviews, the opinion that he wouldn't have done it again if he knew, but I'll always be glad that he did.
I will too, honestly. Like I said at the top, for me, I respect these and I respect the foundation laid here more so than I enjoy the stories, but I had a good time with the reading. It's fascinating. It's lent itself to some great discussions. And this is really, we've been using the word seismic, but it was the reboot and this era of the titles and everything it gave way to. And I mean, when we think about the ultimate legacy of the Byrne era, I mean, we see direct influences in I would say virtually all of the multimedia adaptations that have followed. I mean, Lois and Clark, most closest in time to this, and most obviously the Superman the animated series, key aspects of Smallville, all the way to the most recent Gunn movie. So I mean, we see that a lot, but I think thematically, to me, I guess what I feel like the greatest gift of this era was the emphasis on the character's humanity. Even though in these stories, it came at too great an expense on the Krypton side, I feel. But the emphasis on the humanity, his upbringing, and that relationship with the Kents, I really feel like that's the thing. And if that's all we got from this, it's so worth it to me.
And if we're talking Lois and Clark, there's that great line, Superman is what I can do. Clark is who I am. And Byrne gave us that.
Yeah.
So,
is there anything we haven't said that you want to say?
I think we've covered just about everything. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you tonight.
No, this was great. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed all of our messages, over the years, and I appreciate your perspective and you embarking on this reading assignment, this homework with me.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
And I'm glad to, with this event in particular, we brought a few new voices into the Digging for Kryptonite fold, which is great. I mean, I love obviously our regular stable of guests, but where we have the opportunity to bring in some new voices, I love to do that, and keeps the show fresh. And it's always great to have these discussions. So really, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I will be looking forward to hearing the next episode, but I'll never hear the end of it if I don't tell my son Carter that I got a chance to talk to Mr. Desiato tonight. And hey, Carter, it's me, Dad. Love you.
Oh, that's awesome. Shout out to Carter. He made a vocal cameo in one of our episodes earlier this year, asking about Connor Kent.
So happy. Thank you again for giving him that.
Oh, my pleasure. It's awesome. And there you have it, guys. That was our 5-episode John Byrne revisitation. I don't really expect to do this again. We've looked at the Byrne stuff a couple of times. I think we will intersect with the Byrne era in various places along the way. Certainly when we talk about Supergirl, when we talk more about Brainiac. So we'll hit on this again from time to time. But as far as kind of soup to nuts John Byrne era, I think this was it. And I'm proud of the discussions we've had and the perspectives we've shared. And I know, there will be people who will agree with certain views expressed and disagree. And it might be somewhere in the middle, but I'm curious to hear from folks about what they think. Especially if they've read or reread these stories recently. I would be especially keen to hear from that perspective, because sometimes you go back to these things and, you see with fresh eyes. All right. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, audience. Keep tuning in. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is now available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.